I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Walsh, would you lead us in a flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sunshine Law Statement, all requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the Record and Town News and all persons requesting such notice. Mr. Darian, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, responsible citizens.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Acosta will not be here tonight. Mr. Del Greco.
Here.
Mrs. Downey.
Here.
Mr. Nutlin and Mrs. Norian will not be here. Mrs. Walker.
Here.
Mr. Walsh.
Here.
Mr. Darian.
Here.
Mrs. Watson-Nichols.
Here, open to the public for agenda items only. Not seeing any, we'll move forward. Under my report tonight, we will have a presentation of the 22-23 audit financials by Mr. Jeff Bliss, our auditor.
Hi.
Oh, there we go. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's a pleasure to be here to present the audit for the year ended June 30th of '23. We just met with the Finance Committee, went through in detail the financials and the recommendations, but I will go through it again. But our main objective, after we examine the books and review the transactions, is to express an opinion on your financial statements and express an opinion on your compliance with major federal and state grant awards, and to report on any weaknesses or deficiencies in internal controls. Our report on the financial statements was unmodified. Unmodified means a clean opinion. Clean opinion means the financial statements are fairly stated, prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and there were no scope limitations in the audit. An unmodified opinion in a financial statement audit is an absolute must. Anything that creates a modification means the financial statements, there's an issue or a misstatement or a misapplication of how accounting standards were applied. Our opinion on your compliance with major federal and state grants was also unmodified, meaning a clean opinion, meaning you complied in all material respects with your compliance requirements of your federal and state grants. An unmodified or clean opinion on compliance with grants is also a must. Anything other than unmodified means there's a potential that you didn't comply and that funds may be due back to the grantor agency cause for disallowed cost. So I'm happy to say, both financial statement-wise and compliance on your grants, that both opinions are clean or unmodified. With respect to reporting on material weaknesses in internal control or significant deficiencies in internal control, we had no findings that rose to a level of that magnitude. So we do not have any findings in the audit related to material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. With respect to financially, how did you do? If you want to follow along, on page 74 is a summary of your fund balances. Page 74 is the last page of Exhibit C1, which is the budgetary comparison schedule of your general fund. Your general fund is the major operating fund of the district. Probably accounts for somewhere around 98% of the operating costs of the district. It's the budget that you adopt in April, May every year. The major sources of revenue are taxes and state aid. Major expenses are salaries and wages, benefits, tuition costs, plant operation, and maintenance costs. On page 74 is a summary of fund balance. Just overall, your fund balance increased about $117,000, went from $4,626,635 to $4,743,596. So for the year ended June 30th of '23, you improved your financial position. All the fund balance is not all available as the board sees fit. The board has, by resolution, put certain money into specific reserves. Certain money is put aside in reserves by regulation of the state. And I'm going to go through each individual item of surplus or fund balance so you have an understanding what these fund balances are for, how much they are, because as you go forward, especially you're going to start the 24-25 budget process, you need to know what monies are available going forward. So the first item you see under restricted fund balance is capital reserve, $2,042,622, and represents the capital reserve that the board has set aside by board resolution to fund capital projects in the long-range facility plan. This $2,042,000 has not been earmarked for any specific projects, so it's available to fund any future projects that are in the long-range facility plan. If you decide to do one of those projects, or you get a ROD grant and you need to put up your 60% of local funds, the board simply needs to do a resolution to appropriate those funds to those projects. In addition to the $2,042,000, you had $330,000 of capital reserve that was designated for the subsequent year's budget, meaning that $330,000 was earmarked for specific projects in the 23-24 budget. If you do not use all those monies on those projects, the remaining balance will go back to the $2,042,622. Overall, the capital reserve increased about $600,000 from the year before. We basically, we started with about $1.8 million. We used $400,000 on projects. I think it was actually for the auditorium. And then we put $1 million back when we closed the books. So in total, you have roughly $2.4 million in capital reserves. Maintenance reserve, we had $543,157 in maintenance reserve. Again, these are monies put aside by the district to fund maintenance projects that are in the comprehensive maintenance plan. That 543 has not been earmarked for any of those projects. So again, going forward, those monies are available to fund maintenance projects in future years. You also had $100,000 in maintenance reserve that was designated for the subsequent year's budget, meaning that $100,000 is being used now in the 23-24 budget to fund maintenance costs. If we do not use all the $100,000, again, it'll go back to the 543. Both the capital reserve and maintenance reserves are specific for their purpose. They cannot be used to fund teacher salaries, administrative salaries, health benefit costs, tuition costs, or transportation costs. These reserves remain in there. If you appropriate them, you don't use them again, they go back. The maintenance reserve, the total of $643,000 is the maximum the district is permitted to have at the end of the year. The district also had an emergency reserve of $130,425. These are monies that also were set aside by board resolution. Very difficult reserve to use except for security projects that are in the original budget adopted by the board, or they can be used during the year to fund unbudgeted health benefit costs that exceed 4%. Any other purpose other than those two purposes requires the executive county superintendent's approval. And that approval is very difficult to get. They will look at other areas where you have funds to draw from before they draw down those funds. The maximum that you're allowed to have in that reserve is $250. You're about halfway there at $130,425. You also had $25,717 in an unemployment compensation reserve, and it represents the money the district has put away to pay unemployment claims. Many, many years ago, like most governments in New Jersey, the board adopted what is called the reimbursement method to fund its unemployment claims. Basically means you're self-insured. So when someone goes on unemployment, and that claim comes to the district signs off on it, we pay those claims dollar for dollar. The funding of those claims is made up of two sources: your portion plus the employee's portion. The employee's money gets used first. Your portion, the $25,000, is the portion that is used last. This account has not changed in many years. So we've been able, when we do have claims, to use the employee's money that's set aside in the trust account. We also, at the end of the year, had excess surplus of $357,356. Excess surplus is a required reserve when the unassigned fund balance exceeds 2%. When the district closes the books, we make the transfers into the reserve accounts, the capital reserve, maintenance reserve, even emergency reserve. In New Jersey, anything over 2% of the budget must go into this excess surplus reserve. This reserve can only be used as a revenue source in the 24-25 budget, so you cannot use it for any other purpose. So when you start the 24-25 budget process, the minimum amount of fund balance you must anticipate in that budget is the $357,356. Can't use it for any other purpose. That is compared to the excess surplus from the prior year, June 30th of 22, of $516,457. In 22, the calculation was based on 4%, and at 4%, the district was over $516,457. Those funds are being used now in the 23-24 budget as a revenue source. It's funding operating costs of the current year. So in all fact, those monies are no longer available going forward to fund future expenses because you're using them to pay expenses of the current school year. The next two items on the committed fund balance and assigned fund balance, year-end encumbrances of $46,709 and $88,760, represents open purchase orders at the end of the year where the district has ordered goods or awarded contracts where the goods have not been received or the contracts have not been performed. You don't owe anybody money because you didn't get anything, but you have committed and assigned those purchase orders to those purchases. When the goods are received and the services are rendered, we reclassify those purchase orders from encumbrances to accounts payable. They get expensed and paid to the vendor as the services and goods are received and the services rendered. Those monies are no longer available going forward. At this point in time, they've been completely liquidated. That leaves you with unassigned fund balance. That's the surplus, the fund balance that's available to the board for future expenses as the board sees fit. That's $562,393. It represents the 2% maximum you're allowed to have, which is roughly $277,000, plus you're allowed to add to that 2% any unbudgeted aid from extraordinary aid and non-public school transportation aid that you received during the 22-23 year get added to the 2%. So the 2% is 277, and about 285 of unbudgeted aid comes to the 562,393. The important part of the additional amount you're allowed to add to the 2% is that the board, by resolution during the year, can appropriate that money to the 23-24 budget without approval from the Commissioner of Education or the county superintendent. The practice of not budgeting that state aid is very financially sound, a very good practice, as it allows the district to add it to the 2%, and it gives you flexibility in the subsequent year. If something comes up that's unbudgeted, you can draw off this unassigned. To go into the 2% portion would require the Commissioner of Education approval. To get that, you would have to basically have no money, and that's not going to happen here. So financially, you improved your financial position. You're in very sound, stable financial condition. You have capital reserves, you have maintenance reserves, you have a small emergency reserve, you have excess surplus to apply to 24-25. So I think overall, financially in very good position. If there's any questions, be more than happy to answer them. No? Okay, as far as recommendations, again, we had we had 3 general recommendations. They're in the smaller report on the last page. Again, they did not rise to the level of material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or reportable conditions of noncompliance. The first one, under financial planning, accounting, and reporting, it was recommended that the district maintain a payroll deduction ledger by individual deduction category for the entire school year. The district does in-house payroll. You don't have a third-party payroll provider. And as such, it's important that you keep a ledger by deduction category, meaning federal withholding, Social Security, state withholding, pension contributions, union dues, of how much came in by category compared to how much went out and what the balance is remaining of those categories. That book was maintained for the beginning of the year. You had some changeover in personnel, and they stopped keeping that record. So I know Peter has instituted that process again. And again, as doing in-house payroll, it's a very important record to maintain. Item 2 also deals with payroll. In auditing the deposits to the IRS, we noted at least one instance where the deposit was not made timely, the monies weren't remitted timely, and therefore the district incurred a penalty and interest charge. Obviously, it's imperative that our payroll remittances to the federal and state government be made timely. Should be done immediately. As soon as the payroll's done, it just should be done. Should be no waiting. The final recommendation is on the facility and capital assets, and it's just recommended that greater care be exercised to ensure all current year additions are included in the capital asset inventory report. The district underwent a complete capital asset inventory, physical inventory, but but for some reason, they didn't pick up some of the current year additions. So in going through the audit, when we're tying out your records to the capital asset inventory records, there were some items that were not included. So we have a full accounting of that. I know we gave it to Peter, and Peter, I believe, submitted it to the fixed asset company, and they submitted a revised report. But we just got to take greater care to make sure that the company includes everything in that fixed asset report. No repeat recommendations. Again, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control. Just these three general recommendations. If there's any questions, be more than happy to
Mrs.
answer.
Walker, did you have a question before?
Going back, thank you very much, very comprehensive. Going back to the bigger book here.
Yes.
We have 2.4 million in capital reserves, correct?
Yes, you're roughly 2.4 million, 2,372,000.
Okay, so roughly 2.4.
Yeah, correct.
Is there a limit to the amount of time that we can retain that?
No, there's no limit on the amount of time. There's a limit on the amount you could put in. The statute says the maximum you're allowed to have is the local share of the cost of the projects in your long-range facility plan. The long-range facility plan is roughly 6.3 million. The local share, if the state gave you the 40% grants that they're supposed to give you, the maximum would be about 3.8 million. But the reality is they're not going to give you that, so the max is somewhere between the 3.8 and 6.2 million. But there's no time limit. I think the important thing is, you know, what I see in Oradell is you put the money in the reserve, but you use it to do improvements. Meaning you're not just putting it away to sock it away. There are districts that just put the money away and they just keep putting it away and they don't use it. So, you know, you funded this whole project here with capital reserve funds, which is good. Saves the taxpayers tremendous amount of cost with interest borrowing and cost of issuance of borrowing.
And going out for referendums and,
Oh, yeah, the whole thing is, yeah. So it's
okay, thank you.
a good reserve to have.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Bliss.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll
Good night,
see you
everyone.
next year.
Yes.
We appreciate it. Most of that 2 million is actually spoken for, Mrs. Walker. You can ask Mr. Darian, we have projects lined up.
I'll be anxious to hear those.
We've already identified 330,000, and of the 2 million that's in capital reserve, we've already identified half of that, so, yeah.
Part of it's been postponed though, right? Can't
Part-
get
Yeah,
delivery.
part was postponed from this summer to the following, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, we need to set a B&G committee meeting, a policy meeting, and a curriculum meeting. So maybe we can meet afterwards to get those, committee members can meet after to get set up dates. And I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Good evening. We're at that time of the year where it feels like every week is busier than the next. Last week, Oradell Public School raised over $45,000 for the American Heart Association through the Kids Heart Challenge. The driving force behind that program is our physical education teachers, Ms. Mayella and Mr. Kelly, so a very special thanks goes out to them. They owe me a little bit too, because we are probably the biggest earner in the state of New Jersey, so the American Heart Association loves to send me emails and ask us to do even more. Last week also saw 12 of our staff members participating in a Zoom call to learn more about the Fairleigh Dickinson University Orton-Gillingham Teacher Certification Program. This is a 12-credit graduate school courses that will run at OPS in the fall as long as we have the required number of staff members. Last week also ended with the Hoops Championship game. Hoops is our intramural basketball program in 6th grade. We moved the program to the winter from the spring several years ago, and it continues to be a treasured sixth grade memory. I cannot tell you the number of parents whose children now go to OPS who, when I speak to them, go, "My team won the hoops game," including the principal of Riverdale High School, if I remember correctly. Special thanks to Dr. Roth and Mrs. Avdorinos for stepping in to run the finals in Mr. Kelly's absence. We also learned last week that all 23 of our sixth grade teams that submitted video entries to the New Jersey School Board Steam Tank Challenge qualified for the regional competition. Mrs. Cataldo will continue to work with the teams as they create a prototype and sales pitch for their inventions. Last year was our first year competing in Steam Tank, and our goal this year is to see at least one team make it to state finals. This week, our high-impact tutoring grant program began with third and fourth graders. Our robotics club continues to meet after school and has turned into a highly successful program that we look to continue moving forward. We took a new field trip after school today, going to the Blauvelt Mansion with students involved in our lunchtime art club. Mrs. Hawley spent this afternoon sending me photos from the Blauvelt, so if anybody else has never been there and wants to go with me, let me know. A team of teachers and administrators met with River Edge and Riverdale counterparts to create a K-12 language arts and math continuum, which focuses on identifying a vision for teaching and important entrance and exit skills at each grade. This document will be placed on all 3 district websites. We also have a team of teachers and admin right now who are attending a Fraction Boot Camp professional development through the PRISM program at Montclair State University, with tonight being their final session. To take you through some of the items on tonight's agenda, on the personnel addendum, you will notice several staff members are being approved to facilitate the Dibbles Parent Academy occurring next week. All parents in grades K-12, K-2 will receive their child's Dibbles score report and an explanatory letter by the end of this week. The Parent Academy will provide additional information on how to read that report and what types of learning activities can be used to strengthen knowledge and skills. You will also notice that an amendment has been submitted to the ESSER ARP grant. The amendment focuses on 16 days of professional development with K-5 math teaching resource, which will provide all teachers in K through 5 with 2.5 full days of professional development and additional materials to support the work. 3 days of structured literacy workshop over the summer by Windsor Learning. That will be for up to 30 members. The grant will cover the cost of the workshop, and the district will cover the cost of, as we know, our teachers get paid $30 per hour for professional development outside of school hours, so the district will put that cost in our budget for next year. It will the ESSER ARP will also fund a staff developer to work with 14 staff members for 5 professional days during the spring and summer to rewrite our writing curriculum. That new writing curriculum will also include an emphasis on grammar, as I spoke recently about our curriculum and our chance to re-envision it. The staff developer that I am talking with is specifically known for the work she's done with grammar mini units. And we talk a lot that ESSER is a little confusing because there are different pots, and different pots of money can only be used for certain things. So one pot of the money is the Beyond the School Day money. It has to be used for programming outside of the normal school day. And we will be doing K through 6 STEAM experiences. There will be a kindergarten parent-child STEAM night, a first grade parent-child STEAM night, a grade 2 through 3 evening and after-school experience. It will begin with a parent-child night. Children will then have the opportunity to spend 4 days in the STEAM lab with a group of hired teachers to work on STEAM experiences, and then we will bring their parents and children again together for a night event so that the students can show their parents what they have learned. We will repeat that experience with grades 4 through 5, and then we will also be running an application after-school STEAM experience for our 6th graders, where they'll have more of an opportunity to use some of the STEAM materials they don't always get to use when there's so many kids in the STEAM lab. So whether that be the 3D printers and some of the coding materials that we're using. And this way we can really focus on STEAM, because we have always said that it is a great way to build student engagement, to work on perseverance, but it also has a little other goal for us, we know from our NJSLA data that our weakness in science is physical science, so every one of those activities will also work on physical science. An additional item on the agenda tonight is the Memorandum of Understanding with the Police Department. I thought it would be useful to give you a little background about that. That's a template agreement between police departments and school district officials that puts protocols in place for everything from when a district should notify the police. So for example, if we call DCPP about a concern with a child, it is in that Memorandum of Understanding that we also notify the police department about our concerns. It identifies when search and seizure can be done, issues with drugs in a school, body cam video footage for police departments on school property. And that will be submitted as soon as it has signatures from the 3 required individuals. And I'd like to end tonight with something that I am so proud of with this school community, and that is that we do have the largest and oldest PTA around. So a very sincere thank you to the Oradell PTA for their generous donations on tonight's agenda. I tried to find which one I was most excited about, and I have to say it is probably the art one with the digital cameras, because we've always said that our PTA is working hand in hand with us when what they're doing is supplementing and complementing what we're doing. So that digital media unit is a brand new unit in our 6th grade art curriculum, and now we have to do less sharing because the PTA has helped us to have the cameras to really let our students experience something a little different. So thank you to the PTA, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Iapelli?
I'd just like to say that we are in the midst of preparing the 2024-25 school budget. The state just released the budget calendar this afternoon, so I haven't had time to review it as to when the budget is due and the public hearing dates. I will get that to you as soon as I have that. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Moving on to minutes, review of January 24th. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Iapelli. We have approval of January 3rd. Whoever makes the motion, I would like to make a change. The adjournment should not be, the motion should not be by me, it should be by Mrs. Norian. So I would like whoever's going to make the motion for the January 3rd to just note that it's with Mrs. Norian adjourning the meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve January 3rd's minutes as amended.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Any questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Abstain.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes,
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, committee reports, administrative, Mr. Darian.
Yes. I'd like to introduce items A1, which is a HIB report and a uniform memorandum of agreement with law enforcement.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes,
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, buildings and grounds, Mr. Darian.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce, so before I do that, I just wanted to say we have not had a B&G meeting prior to this board meeting, so I have nothing really to the report. Just to put a little perspective on our audit and the capital reserve account, the long-range facility plan, which is a 10-year plan, we can have up to 3.8 to 6 million in that reserve in order to cover that long-range plan, but that's a 10-year plan. It's not like we would want to do everything on that long-range plan all at once. So the fact that we have 2.4 million out of the 3.8 to 6 is a pretty good number in terms of, managing the balances in the capital reserve account so that we have the funds to do what we need to do in order to maintain this building and not have it run really low. So with that said, I'd like to introduce item B1, which is for facility use.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? I just have a quick question. The book clubs, are those PTA? Those are PTA?
Yes, they are.
Any other questions? Call the question?
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey? Yes. Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Curriculum, Mrs. Norian is not here. Mrs. Downey, you want to take that?
Okay, I'd like to introduce C1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question?
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Finance, Mrs. Acosta is not here. Mr. Darian, would you take that?
Yes, I would like to introduce items D1 through D11.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions?
I have a comment.
Mr. Darian?
Yes, on D5, D6, these are expenditures for land. Land is, or Land Associates, is our architect of record. And whenever we're doing projects like the HVAC replacement, it's required by the state that everything is drawn up and bid is created. And so land is a vital partner in these projects. And so this is not something that we're just doing because we just don't feel like doing it ourselves. I also like to mention on D11, our superintendent, Ms. Bozios, thanked the PTA, but I'd just like to mention that $22,000 is a lot of money, and it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Walker?
I have I guess it's a question or an explanation for D4. Is the approval of special education Medicaid initiative. I'm sure that's been on our approvals in past years, but maybe someone could explain it.
Mr. Iapelli, can you take that?
We have identified actually 0 students. It's fewer than 40 students, and there's really no money tied to it, so, but you have to say you're waiving it.
So, but there aren't any students that qualify.
We have no students that identified that qualified.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Mrs.
Uh,
Walker?
And just to comment on Greg's donations by the PTA, it's wonderful, and all of these things are dedicated to the kids. There's nothing here that really is functional for the workings of the school. It's all dedicated to the kids. And amazing at almost at 21.9, almost $22,000. Just amazing. And especially when they're the oldest.
And largest.
But think about it, the oldest. Is it the people are the oldest or the? No. It's wonderful.
Any other finance comments? Mr. Del Greco?
Yes, I would just like to also thank the PTA for this very generous and diverse list of items. As a parent myself, I can say that it is very well appreciated, especially some of the items for the kids. So thank you.
How many pizza slices did you buy and donate to this?
Cool school supplies, pizza, more than you know.
It adds up. Any other questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Watson Nichols?
Yes. Delegate report, Mr. Walsh.
I have no report.
Personnel, Mrs. Walker.
Yes, we haven't had a meeting, but we are going to schedule one tonight. And with that, I'd like to present F1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Mrs.
I
Walker?
just have one quick question. On 1A, is there a replacement for that aid that has resigned?
As of right now, we can fill the position because of some other situations in the school with staff that are already here. And we're going to see how that goes, and if we need to go out to hire an aide, we actually keep a live posting for aides on our website at all times, so we can go into that pool if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
What's ELNIC?
The Early Learning Improvement Community. It's the program we're doing with the state of New Jersey and also the state of Vermont at the same time. It looks at early math practices. So they came, professors from Rutgers came here to look at our teachers teaching, and we're actually going to go to another school, and that's also part of the program, and see some teaching there.
So the staff members live closer to Middlesex than they do us with the mileage?
One definitely does. I'm not sure about the others.
Okay, so we're just not, okay, all right. Any other questions? Mrs. Walker?
And then what's the advantage for us to have the Rutgers folks come here?
To expand our horizons. As we say all the time, being a one-school district is a curse and a blessing. And it's really important that we look at what other people are doing and we learn from them. So in this case, that's given us that opportunity. A key component of this program is also teachers videotaping themselves and looking and studying their lessons. So it just lets us go and study someone else at the same time.
Do they actually teach lessons also for this teachers, the folks from Rutgers? Do they come in and take over?
I don't think in this time they did. They really came to watch, observe, and say, listen, what about trying it this way?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Call the question.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, policy, Mr. Del Greco.
We have not had a meeting so far, and we're going to schedule one tonight.
Public relations, Mrs. Downey.
Nothing new to report.
At this time, we'll open to the public.
Hi, how are you? I'm Jen Abitabalo. I have a first grader currently.
Can you just sign the book and put your,
Oh,
so
sure.
we don't forget?
Yeah. So this question is really just whether it would be possible to perhaps move the meetings from a YouTube streaming to more of an interactive platform like Zoom or Teams or Blue Jeans, only because there seems to be a lot of support from the parent community that the time is difficult for people to come, and although there's a big volume streaming, they don't have the opportunity to interact. So if we could move more towards a Zoom platform, at least you could see the involvement from the parent community, and then at the end, it would also give people an option to interact from a distance. So just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. If there's no one else, we'll move to old and new business for the board. Any old or new business? We do need to go into a closed session for legal / student / personnel / negotiations issues. So, Mr. Darian, would you mind making that motion?
I make a motion that we go into executive session.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Roll call.
On the roll, Mr. Del Greco.
Yes.
Mrs. Downey.
Yes.
Mrs. Walker.
Yes.
Mr. Walsh.
Yes.
Mr. Darian.
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, we will not be taking any action after the closed session.
Oh.
Thank you for coming.
And this is just a quick aside.